to our political panel and our discussion on North Korea. We're so glad you could make it, and a little introduction about LiNK. It stands for Liberty in North Korea, and we're a purely humanitarian organization, and we're unaffiliated with any religion or political views, and we're dedicated to two missions. Firstly, we're dedicated to bringing light to the humanitarian crisis taking place in North Korea. And secondly, we work to help with the rescue of these refugees by raising funds and and to accomplish these missions, our chapter here at UCSD, we do fundraisers and have events like these to bring light to what's going on in Korea.
Okay, so tonight we're very honored to hear from two of our own professors, Dr. Yu and Dr. Hagrid.
Guess which one of us is which?
He's Hagrid.
I'm you.
Dr. Yu is an assistant professor and associate director of the Korea Pacific program at the Graduate School of International Relations and Pacific Studies at UCSD. At IRPS, he teaches graduate courses on Korean politics, social justice, and public policy, and policy implementation process. He also teaches an undergraduate course on Korean politics. And his research focuses on the problems of corruption, social trust, and inequality. He received a PhD in public policy at Harvard University in 2006. Before pursuing an academic career, he worked for democratization and social justice in South Korea. And he was imprisoned for more than 2 years because of his active role in the anti-dictatorship student movement under the military regimes, but later was recognized as a person of merit by the democratic government. And he also worked for the Citizens Coalition for Economic Justice, which is an influential NGO in Korea, as dictator of public policy research and later as general secretary. Dr. Stephen Hagrid he's an author of 2 books on North Korea, both with Marcus Nolan. One of his books are Famine in North Korea, Markets, Aid, and Reform, which was written in 2007, and Witness to Transformation, Refugee Insights into North Korea, which was written in 2011. He also runs a blog on North Korea with Marcus Nolan, and if you look on the board over there, there's the URL for that blog. You can also find it by Googling Witness to Transformation blog. We hope that you guys will enjoy tonight and that you'll be inspired to take action for the liberation of North Korea and its people.
Well, thanks for coming. We've worked out a little division of labor, and we're going to try to not talk for very long because we don't like to hear ourselves talk. We'd rather listen to you guys talk and ask questions. So I'm going to talk for about 10 or 15 minutes and outline some of the issues dealing with North Korea. And then Jung Sung in particular is going to talk about some of the issues north-south and what's going on in South Korean politics towards the north, because that's a very important dimension of the whole issue. So one of my friends who was on the National Security Council during the Bush years, which doesn't mean I'm identified with the Bush administration, a guy named Victor Cha, always says that North Korea is the land of lousy options. And I think that's true. And one of the reasons it's the land of lousy options is because it presents 3 very different types of problems. It presents a security problem, it presents a humanitarian problem, and it presents a human rights problem. So let me just talk briefly about each of those. I think this is a pretty sophisticated audience. Most of you follow the events there a little bit, so I think you know a lot of what I'm going to say, but at least it'll provide a sort of framework to have a discussion. So with respect to the security issues, obviously the Korean Peninsula is divided. It's been divided since 1950. It was divided by an armistice, not a peace treaty. The armistice that was signed in 1953 is not a formal peace treaty. So there's still the question of reaching a peace agreement between the parties to the Korean War. And as we've seen from 2 episodes last year, the sinking of the Cheonan and the shelling of Yeonpyeong Island, that conflict is still there. And Jong-sung will say a little bit more about that. Obviously, for the United States, one of the central issues has to do with the whole nuclear question. So it's not just the North-South, it's not that North Korea has effectively broken out and become a nuclear power. North Korea's long had an interest in acquiring nuclear weapons. This is really the second nuclear crisis. There was a nuclear crisis in 1994, under which the main nuclear reactor that they have, which generates fissile material at Yongbyon, was shut down. But after 2002, 2003, this crisis erupted again, and the North Koreans tested a nuclear device of some sort, low yield, in 2006, and they tested again in 2009. So obviously, the United States has an interest, and the other parties of the region, including Japan and South Korea, Russia, and China, have all said that they want to see a denuclearized Korean peninsula. And the mechanism for doing that is the so-called 6-party talks that involve the 6 countries of the region, that is including the United States, the 2 Koreas, Japan, China, and Russia. And those talks have been stalled since 2008, at which point they broke down at the very end of the Bush administration. As you may know, Jimmy Carter and a group of other former heads of state, actually Carter is not the only one of note on this visit. There's Mary Robinson, who's the former President of Ireland, is on this trip. Gro Brundtland, who is the former Prime Minister of Norway, the former Prime Minister of Finland, are also on this trip. They're the so-called elders. And they're in Pyongyang, and we're going to find out shortly whether they were able to actually meet with Kim Jong-il. But part of the purpose of that trip was to see if the 6-party talks or some formula could be devised to get the 6-party talks started again. And Jong-sung has some ideas about that. The security issues are not just limited to the nuclear one, but North Korea is a proliferator of missiles. They may also be a proliferator of nuclear technology, including to the Iranians. And so there's a whole set of issues that surround not just the nuclear program, but North Korea's proliferation activity. So we can talk about that. Now, let me turn quickly to the humanitarian issues, because they're multiple. North Korea experienced a great famine in the mid-90s that probably killed between 600,000 and 1 million people. It's really a staggering event. That's about 3 to 5% of the population. In socialist systems like North Korea and Cuba, for that matter, and the Soviet Union, China, during their socialist phases, high socialist phases, people received food through a public distribution system. And the public distribution system basically broke down during the Great Famine, and so people couldn't secure food. And they, in fact, turned to the market and other types of activities in order to secure their livelihoods. And even though we're not having a great famine now in North Korea, it looks like we're having a recurrence of fairly severe food shortages. And in particular, the summer harvest doesn't look like it's going to be very good because the winter was extraordinarily cold. And so Marcus Nolan and I and others have been advocating that we need to do something about the humanitarian issue probably soon in terms of getting food aid to North Korea. But that's a very controversial topic, obviously, because there's concern that the North Koreans may be exaggerating their situation or the food may be diverted. And so one thing we can talk about is what some of the pros and cons of providing food aid, but we think that the food situation is likely to continue to deteriorate over the next couple of months. And one important thing to understand about food aid is you can't snap your fingers and deliver food to a small village in North Hamgyong province. It takes 2 months just logistically to get food into distressed areas. So waiting can be potentially costly. And so we have to calculate not only what the food situation is now, and I can talk in more detail about what we know and don't know about that, but we have to be forward-looking and think about what is going to happen in several months when this harvest comes in below expectations. Finally, let me just say something briefly about the human rights situation. I don't think a lot needs to be said about this. It's an extraordinarily repressive system. It maintains a very large prison camp system, including large prison camps that intern perhaps as many as 200,000 people for various types of political crimes, from actually being anti-regime to simply folding a newspaper that has Kim Il-sung's or Kim Jong-il's portrait on it. So, you know, it's an extraordinary repressive system. It's also a system which is in the middle of a very complex transition from Kim Jong-il, who is not in good health. He probably had a stroke in 2008 in August, to his son, his youngest son, Kim Jong-un, who's very young, very untested, and as a result of that succession, it isn't a good time to think in terms of political reform, because the regime is basically trying to consolidate this transition process. Part of the humanitarian and human rights issue in North Korea is, of course, the refugee problem. Refugees started to flow out of North Korea during the Great Famine of the mid-90s. The Chinese have been very uncooperative in terms of these refugees. They don't believe that they're refugees. They treat them as economic migrants to China, and therefore they've been uncooperative in granting these refugees refugee status. And so they basically either have to live in China underground or try to exploit the underground railroad in China to get out of China through Mongolia or through Burma or through Laos or through Thailand to third countries. And despite the fact that we think that as many as 200 to 400,000 refugees have at one point crossed that border and moved into China, there are only about 25,000 that have got out of China to third countries. Most of them are in South Korea, about 22,000 now. We only have 100 in the United States. There may be another 1,000 in Europe and several other locations. So the whole question of how we approach the refugee issue is one of LiNK's main missions. They're focused primarily on the question of assisting the refugees getting out of China into third countries or providing them to support in China. But obviously, if the Chinese don't want them there and the North Koreans don't want them there, the whole life of the refugees in China is very tenuous. And there's a lot of opportunities for abuse, including sexual abuse of women who have been sold into what are virtually slavery kind of situations, as well as just abuse with respect to the workplace and the opportunities for North Korean refugees and their children being access to school, to basic social services, to work, to a livelihood. And so estimates of the current number of North Korean refugees in China vary. We think they're more modest than some other people do, but it's still at least 20 to 50,000 refugees that are probably there, maybe as many as 100,000, that are still living in these very tenuous circumstances. So I think I'll stop there, and Jung-sung will talk a little bit about some of the issues in North-South, but hopefully we'll spend most of the time taking the questions.
So I will start with what we, since English is not my native language, that will take a little bit of time. But,
Give you permission.
yeah. But I personally, I very much appreciate your LiNK organization activities. And you guys mentioned both humanitarian issues and also some civil political rights issues in North Korea. In South Korea, that kind of a comprehensive approach is very rarely seen. So there are very polarized views and approaches. So one camp emphasizes humanitarian crisis in North Korea. The other camp emphasizes political rights and civil rights violation and oppression in North Korea. And either camp rarely recognize the other problem and pursue comprehensive approaches. So